Welcome to another edition of the MYBcast, a podcast devoted to educating our followers to alternatives of self-care and wellness through the somatic world of our mind-body connection. Today we're featuring yet another episode of our series, Portraits of the Pioneers. Portraits of the Pioneers is an in-depth look at those that have been actively involved in the exploration, the development, and the practice of somatic touch therapy. Hi, I'm Richard Mack, and I'm here with my co-host Anna Marie Bowers. And today we're moving into episode 2 with our honored guest, Kate Rose. Anna Marie?
Thanks, Richard. It's great to be a part of this podcast. Welcome, Kate, for our second series, our second session with you. We really would like to hear a little bit about some of your experiences with some of your clients, things that you might have noticed, observed, things that changed your practice maybe as a result of working with a client. So just some interesting things that you have observed working with your clients.
There's a lot of those.
That's what we're hoping.
Oh my, they're endless because, it wasn't only clients, it was teaching.
Yes.
I remember making the shift from realizing at one moment during a session that I needed to teach because I was only touching one person at a time. So, watching a whole class morph into the connection is also very, very beautiful. But in terms of clients, there's a million stories. I remember a young man, his girlfriend gifted him with a session, which is always interesting when someone comes not on their own, so to speak.
Right.
Okay, here we go. And he was a very, very tall young man. He was athletic. He had a very stressful job apparently, and even though he tried many, many things, he could never relax. And so he got on the table and I started working with him. And at one point I was just playing with one of his arms and his shoulder from the front. And, he's fighting me and I'm like, okay. And at one point he turned to me, he said, "I'm fighting you." I said, "That's fine." He said, "I'm going to keep fighting you." I said, "And I'm going to keep not fighting back." And, and then it shifted, of course. And so we finished the whole session and his system got more and more receptive. When he got up, and I thought, well, this will be interesting. He got up off the table and he said, "I don't take drugs, but I would say that I've never experienced anything like this feeling. I'm in a completely different state of consciousness. I'm inside relaxation. I'm inside peace." And I'm like, yay, because truly, and I think you've all experienced this, sometimes you get lucky and you get to be with a client that is ripe, that food is just ready and you get to be the one. And so you get a lot of credit, but honest to God, it's not like you're doing that much. But the main thing was that moment, that exchange that we had where he said, "I'm fighting you." And I was like, "You can fight me as long as you want. I'll stay here all day, but I'm not fighting back." That was so new to him. And that's what went into his mind, I think. So that was very, very beautiful. I had a lovely experience when I was teaching in Cairo once, where after the training, one of the practitioners brought her mother to me for a session, and her mother had Parkinson's, as Milton would say. And I, I did everything I could. I tried and tried, let's try this, and we'll try this, and we'll try this, and we'll try this. And nothing worked. She simply couldn't move standing. So I thought, okay, I'm going to put you on the table. So she got on the table and I thought, and her body was really like wood, it was rigid, rigid, rigid. And I thought, I have nothing else to do. So I said to her, "Tell me what the softest thing is that you have a memory of." And she said, "My grandbaby's tushy," and her whole body went soft.
Oh.
And I got it, right? It was in her mind. As soon as she recalled softness, she became soft. That was a huge, huge lesson for me and has stayed with me a long, long time. There's so many beautiful experiences of watching people discover themselves. Everyone I can say this, to me, sessions are magic. You know, I've been doing this, since 1988 or something. And every time I give a session, I still think, well, I hope it works. Right? And every time something amazing happens and a person goes, oh, I'm so peaceful. I've never felt this. I'm so soft. And especially coming back from, not being able to do very much. It reminded me of when Milton had his stroke, because I went to the first training with him after the stroke. And he couldn't move very much. He was still in a wheelchair, but he just was there, and he did things like had us weigh a shoulder for 40 minutes, and then he'd come by to see if, quote unquote, the hookup was there.
Can you explore a little bit about play as an aspect of the work?
Well, from my perspective, it has to be playful. You have to bring, because that's part of what lightness is. And the difference between saying to someone, I'm working on you, and I'm just going to play with this weight, is, that approach. But the feeling in my own system to be playful, to be light, to be, how can you not be playful? I mean,
Yeah, for
right,
me, play
levels of curiosity, right? I remember having this client who was, this is a great story, I forgot about this. This was a man, again, whose wife had sent him because obviously something was wrong with him. And he came, and he was a small man. He was dressed in like a three-piece suit with a vest. He worked at a bank. He had very shiny shoes. And I thought, wow, this is going to be interesting. So I gave him a session, and he liked it very, very much. And, he wanted to come back. And I thought, really, he's quite shy, really. He came back 3 weeks later. I walked up to my office, and he's standing in front of my office door in blue jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt that says, I have to be me. And he said, I quit my job. And I said, I'm not responsible. But he tasted freedom, and it hit him so deeply that's where he went with it. He became playful. He became whatever playfulness had been in him and had been locked down. He became it again, which was very, very beautiful. There's wonderful things also, of course, about healings. I worked with a young man who was, I think he was 13 or 14 at the time. He had cerebral palsy. It manifested mostly in the left side of his body. He was losing all kinds of tissue in his right arm. They were going to take a bone or whatever from his hip and put it in. And we did several sessions together, and we talked a lot about recall. We talked about what his other arm felt like. We talked about movement, just, whatever movement he could do. And he regrew the bone. It just regrew. And he never had to have surgery, and he had all kinds of movement. And these things for me were the magic and the miracle and the science, if you will, of what this work is capable of when you allow the space for it to express itself, which is the difference between trying to make something happen and just creating a space so that what's already there, all that cellular memory, all that consciousness can just re-express balance in tissue, balance in cells, balance in DNA. Do you want more?
So that aspect of recall, did you find that was something that played into working with people with partial paralysis?
For me, recall is always there. I just take it for granted in the sense of I know that the data is in those tissues. I think that is part of a gift, that when I look at someone, I don't see what's wrong with them. I see their wholeness and what isn't allowing it to be complete. And so, one of the things that I developed, and we developed in Europe a lot when I was teaching there as a group, was we began to focus on the principles, not on moves, because it began, as you know, to get kind of trapped in a technique. This is the neck move. This is and as a dancer, because when you're looking at a piece of choreography, you're looking for fluidity and connectiveness and, how it all moves together. And one of the, how can I say, eye-opening moments was when I went to Prac 1 with Betty in Quebec and Montreal, Quebec. And the first thing she would do in those days is tell you all the things Milton wasn't doing anymore, and to never, ever mention the name of a move. And, and I'm standing there and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I just spent a year learning this piece of choreography and now they're telling me not to use it. Right? So that was the first hit of, once I began teaching, I just saw it as one fluid movement. And so it wasn't a question of how do I move this, just how does it move? And the principles of, where is lightness? Where is recall? Where is softness? Where is elongation? Where is weight? Once you did that, the movements appeared on their own. Of course they did, So recall for me, again, it's just part of that. It's not separate. It's not separate from anything. And the assumption of wholeness, in other words, looking at a person and saying, you might not know it, but that memory is in there and we're going to do our best to find it. Yes.
No, I was just going to share that the idea of where you're going with this whole thing about it not being a rote type of a session where you as the practitioner are going in, A, with a sense of curiosity, B, a sense of intuition, connecting that hookup we talked about, and then 3, the sense of love that you're projecting love into this being. And I want to say that I did a lot of work with the cerebral palsy athletes and so forth, but besides that kind of work, and truly through neuroplasticity and using the soft tissue, you can go in and introduce new movement patterns, and neuroplasticity will rewrite those movement patterns into a healthy part of the brain. And through repetition, there you have a new sense of a structural issue is fine. They have their bones and so forth, as you pointed out. But the fact is that the functionality of supporting that was important, and that's what they were lacking. Interestingly enough, I've had quite a few ADHD kids come through me. Somebody referred me through the Traeger organization to somebody, and I was able to work. And all I really did over a period of 3 or 4 sessions was just bring that young person, and they were about 8 years old, into a sense of feeling their body. I mean, the ADHD was just, their brain was just going and going and going, and they had no sense of stop. They were very disruptive in class and so forth. But within a very short period of time, and getting them to feel their breath, feel their body, feel their leg drop into a pillow on the table, feel what that feels like. It just went, just popped them into place. So I'm only I'm only sharing my experience of the things that you've taught me about how this stuff is going to impact at a much deeper level than just a movement.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I did a lot of work with autistic children, and it was the same type of thing. I understood immediately that they had their relationship with gravity simply did not exist. We have a relationship with gravity. We just, this is here and this is there. For them, everything's pretty much floating in space, and so are they. And so finding a way to connect with, I had 2 children that I worked with in the same family that were autistic, and the little boy was quite severe, and I had a friend in Virginia in those days who had started a nursery school that she mixed, quote unquote, normal children with special needs. So we took this little boy and his sister to this school. And one day the children were playing with balloons, where they would just pop the balloon in the air and then everyone would run and get it before it hit the ground. And so it was pretty fast. And this little boy couldn't get to it because he moved so slowly, And I stopped. These children were the ages between 3 and 6, maybe 3 and 5. And I stopped them and I said, he would really love to play, but could we do it like you're underwater? And they were like, wow. And every single kid just instantly went into slow motion, and then he could play. So it's the same as finding it, whatever you're finding with someone you're working with is their rhythm, their language, what it is. It's not your language that you want to impose on them. And that's for me is really the key.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. So, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your teaching. I know that you've taught, and we're saying Cairo, not Cairo, Ohio, Cairo, Egypt.
Cairo, Egypt, yes.
So I find this fascinating because this is an international phenomena, this world of somatic touch, somatic movement. The Body Keeps the Score has done a wonderful job of waking people up to the fact that this is something that is very, very powerful. How did you experience working in Europe, in the Middle East, in Canada, in comparison to the United States? Is there a certain sensitivity that we, what did you experience in the different places that you've worked? That's the question.
It's a big question. I was living in Italy, and if you've ever been to Italy, the rhythm of life not in the cities, because of course cities are cities, but I was in the countryside a lot, and is slower. There's a lot of fluidity. There's a lot of focus on beauty. There's a lot of focus on effortlessness, which is to me what the core of this work is about. So that was easy. I would say we would have our conferences, up sometimes in Migroto, and so we'd have instructors and tutors from all over the world, and so you got to taste how it was different with each culture. And that was very interesting teaching, especially when I first started teaching in Cairo, Egypt. Very, very simple things that you had to adjust yourself to the culture and to the language. When I first moved to Italy, I did not speak Italian, but I started giving tutorials instantly without any verbal language needed, just through touch and connection. Egypt was extraordinary. I loved Egypt, and I taught there several times before and after the revolution. When I went after the revolution, I had already been teaching there for a number of years, and the training that I was teaching at that time had been canceled because of the revolution. So I had a 3-year hiatus where I couldn't go back to Egypt. So I went back, and when I got into the room, this was about 12 women who I'd been working with for probably 10 years and loved and adored, and they were all themselves with a cloud of PTSD that was normal for everyone. The conversations were like, did that bomb go off by your house the other day? Or did you hear that gunfire? And I'm thinking, I don't have reference points for this. But what I did have reference points for was seeing the heaviness, the effort, the grief, all the different pieces. This is where functional empathy somatics really was born in a certain way, because I was going to be teaching a level 5, and I just threw it out the window and said, okay, we're doing a training on PTSD. And we spent, I think, 6 days together. And it was when you talk about seeing clients, quote unquote, or students, these were all professional practitioners, changing. We just focused on empathy. We just focused on what is it that you need. I don't have any technique. I don't have any particular protocol. Let's just find. And so we just kept doing that over and over and over and over again. By the last day, we had just blown the cloud away. It was like everyone emerged with joy and laughter and poetry, and it was one of the most magnificent experiences I've ever had, watching the level of transformation when people are proficient in the work already. In addition to not just doing Traeger work, there were yoga teachers, there were cranial sacral people from social workers from all different countries in the Middle East and living in Egypt. And I brought that training back to America and taught it as a level 5 Traeger and PTSD, which was really, really, again, a very beautiful experience, which I think would be very apt, for right now in terms of this focus. You said something about love, and I would say that in every session I give, in every interaction I have in any kind of healing work that I'm doing, that's what's become clear to me. It's just love. You're just loving the person and their life and the tissue. There's no judgment. And that's what it is. You're in it. You're in this state of, the Buddhists talk about compassion, just this deep core compassion and empathy that you are there simply to offer. But yeah, as far as cultures go, very, very, very different. America is the most difficult because people seem to be. In fact, I remember coming back to live in America in 2012, I guess. I don't remember which time it was I came back. And Anne Marie actually called me at one point. She said, Kate, it isn't the same here. Just to help me out. Like I had this expectation because the difference in community in Europe and in the Middle East was quite extraordinary.
I would like to go back for a moment and talk about the state of the practitioner. That is really key because we're experiencing that right now. A dear friend of mine and yours, Fernando Rojas, has been teaching classes somatic mindfulness to licensed massage therapists, and he's taught well over 2,000 students now with the idea of the approach, the approach that we use with Traeger and so forth. And I've had the good fortune of joining him in a number of classes. And the one thing that I'm noticing is that the healers need to be healed.
Always, always.
That's a
Where
big
were we?
piece of it.
I'm trying to remember, Henry, if you were there with me. There was when I got invited to do a massage therapy conference. It was like
Yes,
you were there, right? We had a
I
whole,
believe so.
yeah, we had a whole bunch. We had 55, 60 massage therapists.
Right.
And we had, I don't know, 8 or 9 assistants were there.
Yes.
And I took a look at all of them and all I could see was pain. They were all in pain. So I just started out by saying, just checking in, if you're in pain of any kind, just raise your hand. Every single person raised their hand. And so I thought, whoa, what is it like to be worked on constantly by people who are in terrible pain? Which
Right.
is very normal with massage therapy. I love massage. Who doesn't love massage? But it's very, very hard on the body. So what we did was we broke up into groups, and I gave a group of however many, 8 people to every assistant and to myself, and we gave everybody sessions. And it was very, very life-changing. So it was introducing this idea, which is a very core thing for people, the balance between giving and receiving. I mean, I've often said to people, if you hold your hand out like I'm getting ready to give you something, can you tell if I'm giving you something or if I'm receiving something from you? It's the same. The idea that giving is better than receiving, that you're weak if you need to receive, that you should be strong and heroic, and we're warriors for healing. And but self-care, and this was something I learned when I became a NCBTMB approved provider. The first training I wanted to list was self-care for the practitioner. They're not interested in it. It's still there, but they limit the amount of credits you can have. They don't feel it's important. They don't, and that's what they teach. And so to have someone like you and Fernando and Maddie going in to offer this idea, the best way I've always found to offer the idea is not through words, just through touch. When I first became a practitioner, and long ago in a galaxy far away, I was living in Ithaca, New York, where everybody knows everybody, and people say bless you before you sneeze and things like that. And I was walking up and down what was the Commons in those days and bumping into people I knew, and they're saying, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I just became a Traeger practitioner." "What is that?" And I said, "Well, just give me your arm for a second, you know." And I just stand there in the street with them and weigh their arm until it relaxed, you know, and then let go of it. And I'd say, "How does that feel?" And they said, "I love that. I want that for my whole body." And I said, "Sign up right here." So it was really understanding always that you're just giving the feeling, which Milton said over and over again in that Parkinson's video. And it's the truth. So I was a revolutionary in the organization in terms, as were many of us, in terms of trying, as I said in the beginning, to establish that it was the principles that could create a way of teaching that was simple, incredibly effective. And I remember teaching a training in Holland, and I taught there many times for many, many years. And I had a wonderful group of assistants that worked with me all the time, and we were very, very close. And they got to the point where they started taking bets on how many days it was going to take before the students looked like practitioners, before they could do a full session. We got it. It was usually like the third day, and this was simply because we were teaching the principles. We weren't saying to them, "This is how you move a leg, and this is this," and it was just, okay, we're going to spend an hour feeling the weight of every part of the body. Now we're going to add elongation. Now we're going to play with rhythm, not rocking, rhythm. Find their rhythm, not yours.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I was becoming a level something instructor, and Gail was my guide. What did they call it? I forget.
I believe it was just a mentor,
Yeah,
supervisor, one
supervisor.
of those kind of words.
So I would teach during the day because I was in Holland, she was in California, and then we would, in those days, it wasn't Zoom, it was Skype, I think. We would Skype at the end of the day, and I'd tell her what happened. And I was teaching the belly, and I had one of the assistants come on the table who was a woman, and I played in blah, blah, blah. And then I said, I really need a man's body because I want you to see the difference. So one of the students got on the table and we did that. And I stopped, and they were all standing there staring at me, and they said, "We want you to do that to all of us." And I said, "Really? You do?" Like an idiot. And I thought, this is a big class. So what I did was I took those two people that had already experienced it and sent them to work on each other. And then I worked on every single person. So what they got to see was it was completely different with everybody. It was completely different because it had to adapt to what was going on for that person. And by the end of it, oh my God, the most beautiful belly work I've ever seen. So I called Gail that night and I said, "Well, we had a really interesting day today. This is what happened." And I finished telling her, and she got real quiet, and she said, "Kate, that's how Milton used to teach. Maybe that's what we should be doing." I'm crying just thinking about it.
Thank you for sharing that.
He never did the same thing twice.
Exactly.
Never. The first conference I was at with him, it was huge in those days, 200-300 people, and we'd be in a big ballroom doing the great trade, which was a lot of fun. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to follow him around. I could do a trade anytime, but I wasn't going to be with Milton. So I went to the organizers and I said, "I'm just wondering, could I be one of the people that just follows Milton around with a cup of water during the trade?" And they went, "Oh my God, we forgot about that. Would you mind?" No, I don't mind. So
What a
that's
gift.
what I did. I spent, I don't know how many hours it was, 4 hours or something, following him around from table to table, watching what he did with every single person. There were tables where, like one table, he just told jokes, the cannibal joke. Another table, he was working on this young man's shoulder who's lying on his belly, and he's playing with it. He goes, and he looks at me and he looks around the room. He said, "Don't tell anybody." And he gave him a chiropractic adjustment because that's what he needed. Yeah. So that was my training, a big part of my training, both from my first practitioner, Rita, who was extraordinary and gave me a completely different session every single time I went. and Milton, who I watched do this, you know.
Ah,
Go ahead.
this is a beautiful place for us to take another pause.
Sure.
And Kate, thank you so much for your stories. I love your animation. I love your energy. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you. This is really the most fun I've had in quite a while.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It is.
Well, I'm going to invite our audience to come back to episode 3, which we're going to be talking about what Kate's up to these days. And please join us by clicking on the next episode of Kate Rose. Till then, be well. Thank you.